You have such in-depth knowledge of the Saudi system. Is what they're saying true? Can they really bring on all this supply just in a few weeks?
Well, it was a very interesting press conference, and there's some question about the difference between supply, capacity, and so forth. So they say about half is back, and the other half is going to be met from internal, which could include stocks, could also be from reducing domestic refinery runs. But their message, and then they said November is when it will all be back in operation. So what they've done, Alix, is address part of the real anxiety in the market, and you can see that in the oil price. But the other question is what happens next? Secretary Pompeo is arriving in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis themselves are going to make some determination as to where this attack came from. And there's still the great uncertainty about what's going to be the response. What happens next?
What do you think happens next? It seems like we're waiting for the Saudi press news conference that's going to say this is why we blame you, Iran. Iran has said we're not going to talk to the U.S., but we also don't want war, but we will defend ourselves. In your experience over the last few decades, what does that crosstalk mean?
Well, I think there is this sense that once you say it is Iran, something's going to have to happen. One big question is what are the Iranian intentions here? And it's probably partly because the news on sanctions, on shutting off their oil, has gotten very tight. This obviously undermined any chance that President Trump would meet with President Rouhani in New York. But nobody can afford to show weakness. But you could see the administration backing off from anything direct, because I think what was quite shocking about this attack was the precision both in the targeting and in the execution. Mm-hmm. Alix, you look at the photographs and the symmetry of what was done. It's a message about you escalate, we can escalate further, and everybody's vulnerable.
Agreed. And Dan, what struck me so much is how little, in essence, the oil price moved. And I have this a curve on my terminal, and I should point out the orange line is where the Brent curve is now. The green line is where it was a month ago. You obviously saw a huge re-rating in the front end as you priced in the geopolitical risk, but longer term, the curve barely budged. Dan, is that accurate?
Yeah, well, I think, Alix, I thought that was really interesting. People talked about this great surge in oil prices. What struck to me was it was not a huge surge in oil prices given what had happened. If this had happened several years ago, it would have been a very different reaction. And I think part of that reflects the change in the structure of the world oil market. The U.S. Oil imports now are down to less than 6%. It's China that's quite vulnerable. It's 75%. So the market sort of said we can absorb that, and that's what we're seeing right now, and the price is coming down. But I think it's to emphasize this is not over. Mm-hmm. There's phase 2 and phase 3 here.